Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Jonathan Rowson. Welcome to what has to be one of the finest air-conditioned rooms in London. It's great to see you all here. I hope you're sort of ready for love, as it were. We've had a sort of fairly major setback in that about 90 minutes ago. I heard that Professor Simon May's not very well and couldn't make it tonight. So we had to quite quickly find our feet and figure out how we would go forth. Before we proceed with the substantive amount, please turn your phones to silent. Do tweet if you're so inclined. The hashtag is RSA loves. We tried RSA love initially, but we find all sorts of stuff come up then, as you find if you want to look at that. So RSA loves plural. This event is the penultimate event in our series of talks and debates about spirituality in the 21st century. I'm curious, actually, how many people came here knowing this was partly about spirituality, and how many came just about love? Initially, partly about spirituality? Right, so roughly half. And then those who just wanted the love? Okay, right, okay, so we've got roughly half-half. That's good, because we're going to cover quite a lot of bases. I'll introduce my wonderful speakers in a moment. I suppose I wanted to say something first myself. First of all, about spirituality, and secondly, about love and why we're doing this, because it's difficult to speak about this subject in a technocratic way. I mean, there's no way you can explore a subject like love in that sense. Spirituality likewise, and part of the reason we're doing this thing as a whole is my impression, shared by very many other people, that there has been a slightly instrumental turn in the world in general, a move away from intrinsic values towards extrinsic, a move from a kind of obsession with data in place of evidence, a sort of sense in which mythos may be lost to logos, a sense that we're losing touch with the deeper roots of meaning may be somewhat less accessible to us, a kind of overwhelming amount of information but a loss of wisdom and so forth. Now, these are very broad brush narrative strokes and quite hard to get hold of, but many people seem to sense them. And a lot of what this project is about is trying to tap into what exactly is going on there. And one of the spheres where I feel that's relevant is love. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that, but I just realized that it's kind of remiss of me to have these wonderful people next to me and not introduce them first. I'm just going to quickly tell you that Mark Vernon is a psychotherapist, a writer, broadcaster, and journalist. He began his professional life as a priest in the Church of England. His academic interests are very broad. They began with physics and philosophy and went into theology. He's written many books on related subjects. He recently wrote a book which is very relevant to tonight called Love, All That Matters. And Devorah, I came across on the internet. I wanted to check just where the audience were. So that was a good check. So I know what I'm dealing with now. Okay, right. With a beautiful speech she gave, actually at her own wedding, which is outstanding and really awe-inspiring. She's now a lecturer in English literature at the University of Southampton and an associate of the Parkes Institute for the Study of Jewish, non-Jewish relations. She undertook her doctoral research at King's College London and has previously taught at both King's and the London School of Jewish Studies. And she'll tell you a bit later about her current research interests. When I was thinking about what to say about love in place of Simon, I thought of one of my earliest relationships where my girlfriend told me that she felt that she loved me, but she wasn't in love with me. And this was really distressing. I mean, it's virtually the cruelest thing you can tell somebody. Because I was thinking, what on earth does that mean? And if you just probe it a little bit, you begin to realize what's going on is this kind of a cultural myth of love, a kind of big collective narrative that one either is part of and in or not. And I clearly wasn't at that point in time. But then later I saw this is actually quite a sophisticated position. I believe Osho, one of the sort of main sort of spiritual New Age kind of people, famous for his love of Rolls Royces, if nothing else. But he did say many great things. One of them was, when you're in love, you do not ask the question about the meaning of life. So when you really feel that you're in love, these questions of deeper meaning, why am I here, what's going on, don't seem to matter quite as much. So there is a sense in which love is tapping into something timeless, something that goes beyond all our explanations and where you don't need to give a second explanation for it. The second thing I wanted to say is when I later, through subsequent iterations of relationships, got married, we got married in a civil ceremony in London, actually technically in Richmond. And what was funny about this is that anyone who's had a civil wedding will know this, that you actually have to be careful not to choose readings that have religious content. to respect the divide between church and state, in order for it to be a state wedding and not a church wedding or another religious wedding, you have to be very careful about any readings you give at the ceremony should not be religious. What was most curious about this is, obviously that's a grey area, but they said Halil Gibran's The Prophet is expressly forbidden. That got me wondering, like, what's in this? And I actually knew it a little bit already. It's a book that, for those who don't know, was written in 1923. It's published, tens of millions of copies. And what's wonderful about that statement of love, and I think the reason people keep coming back to it, is it's quite an exacting description of love. It's not all about love as comfort. It has lines about, do not seek to direct the course of love, for love, if it finds you worthy, directs your course. And it says things like, when love beckons to you, follow him, though his ways are hard and steep. And it's full of these kind of love as mystery, love as challenge, conquest. It's not at all about love being all about peace and security. And people seem to like that. So another sort of interesting point. The final point is, we're now in an age some people call postmodern, an age where you can't really speak about love without feeling the term is somewhat saturated, overused. You see it on everything from Coronation Street to the World Cup. You can't really avoid this notion that love is somehow overused and therefore the meaning has been flattened out. And if there's one line about love that I love, really love, it's one by Umberto Eco, who many of you might know. And it's from something he's written where he's trying to describe the postmodern attitude. What is it to be postmodern? And he sort of says it's when you're sort of so saturated with meaning that you can't really view anything without some degree of irony. And he talks about love in this context. He says, I think of the postmodern attitude as that of a man who loves a very cultivated woman and knows he cannot say to her, I love you madly, because he knows that she knows, and that she knows that he knows, that these words have already been written by Barbara Cartland. Still, there is a solution, he says. He can say, as Barbara Cartland would put it, I love you madly. So that's kind of where we are, a problem with love being kind of saturated, love not quite knowing what to mean. And in the context of spirituality, there's those issues of love's depth and love's richness and love's complexity that we want to try and tease out tonight. So we're going to do that with two great speakers and open up the questions for about half an hour at the end. We'll probably end at 7 this evening because Simon's not here, but we'll see how it goes. And initially, I'd like to introduce Mark Vernon.
Thank you, and thank you, Jonathan. What I wanted to offer to continue what you've been just getting into there is a sort of mashup of developmental psychology that I think also has quite important things to say about love in terms of its spiritual elements, dynamics, as well as the relational dynamics. Broadly speaking, if you read particularly the developmental psychology of the second half of the 20th century, where love is not always used, but it's about relationships, that's the point. The developmental psychology got very interested in relationships then. You can sort of discover or discern, broadly speaking, sort of 4 positions, I think, in relation to our development in terms of relationships. The first 3 are relatively uncontroversial, but the 4th is the one where the spiritual element becomes explicit, and so would be more controversial in terms of empirical psychology and things, certainly. But broadly speaking, although people cut it up in various different ways and all that, I think there are sort of 4. And the point about these positions is that we tend to come across them through our life, beginning from when we were born, and we negotiate them for the first time through, chronologically you might say, but then also there's a sort of a sense in which once you've gone through one position, it's there for you to access, to negotiate subsequently in life too. So they're synchronic and diachronic, to use technical language. And life tends to go well when you have good access to these different positions. So let me try and say what they are. The first one is broadly narcissistic in character. This is the young newborn child, desperate for its survival, you might say. Survival is the number one priority. And life is so organized for the child that's cared well enough that what it requires is provided for it. It's hungry, and almost as if by magic, you might imagine milk falls onto its tongue. It feels cold, and almost as if by magic, it's suddenly warm. It feels wet, and almost by magic, it's sort of dry again. And this leads to some of the characteristics which pop up in adult narcissism. For example, omnipotence. can pop up in adult narcissism when you feel somehow the world should be ordered according to what you require or demand. And the idea is that the unborn child has to negotiate its narcissism, which is sort of good, it's required to survive. It needs to scream to communicate to a parent. But nonetheless, if that's the only mode of love that the child is capable of, it's going to cause it a lot of problems later on. So there's a kind of good narcissism, you might say, when you love yourself enough to get over yourself. You can feel comfortable in your own skin, and often, because this is very early developmentally, it often is a very embodied kind of experience. But to feel comfortable in your own skin, in a way, to love yourself enough so you can see there's more than just yourself in the world. You're not just the center of the universe. That's the first position. And the child perhaps begins to get a sense that it's not the only creature in the universe, whole person in the universe, when it realizes actually that it's dependent upon a parent, probably, mother, probably. And I think that this is quite a traumatic experience at first. If you've ever had children, which I actually haven't, but I've observed, then you'll know that sometimes young children, they're hungry, but they refuse to be fed. They won't be comforted. They will hardly be held. They'll kick and scream. You put the blanket over them, they kick it right off again. And one way of imagining what might be going on here is the frustration and the anger, the hatred even, about realizing that you're dependent upon another. And you're not as omnipotent, as it were, as you thought you might be. Certainly, if you look at the adult equivalent, you can read that. You can hear people talk about things in that way. So the idea is it's sort of inferred back. But the good thing is that if you can go through this pain barrier, you can move from the first position, one, the narcissistic dimension, to a dyadic relationship. So this is the second position, which, conveniently enough, is about two people. And life expands as a result. And I think this is one of the reasons why pain is always associated with love, and because an expansion, a growth of love, always requires kind of going through at quite a traumatic phase. I know one of the things which you mentioned when we were talking before is what role will has to play in love. And I don't think you can will yourself to love in a certain way, but what you can do is sort of encourage yourself to go through the trauma in order that a new kind of love might open up. And dyadic love would be the second position. So this is, the young parent in love with their baby, the baby in love with the parent, the ordinary devotion, as Donald Winnicott rather nicely puts it. And then the idea is that this repeats, particularly when you first fall in love as an adult. Romantic love is the kind of adult version of this very early infantile experience, when all you want is to have and to hold. It's very possessive, a bit like, again, the parent and child. But it's a rather exclusive love too. Have you ever sat on a train when two people are canoodling in front of you? It's deeply offensive. And I think it's not offensive because you're a prude about kissing in public. It's offensive because, in effect, they're saying no one else matters. All that matters is my beloved and me. And I think that's partly why it's so disturbing. So it has its limitation. Spiritually, I think you see this in dyadic sort of religious language or sort of religious feeling. When, for example, all that's important is me and my relationship with Jesus. Or all that's important is me and doing my mindfulness meditation. It's like the whole of your spiritual life, as it were, depends upon owning or possessing this one either capacity or relationship. Now, in a way, there's nothing wrong with that. We all fall in love, and maybe that's one of the things which your first girlfriend didn't say. She was looking for something a bit more sort of a third or fourth stage rather than the second stage, which you need, I think, to kind of to have these kind of erotic relationships. But it's limiting again too. And so the idea is that the third position then comes along. And this, in the developmental psychology, is when the young child realizes that mum's not only interested in them, the parent's not only interested in them. There might be a father, there may be her work, there may be siblings. I'm the eldest of 6. Siblings are awful when you were the first and the only to start with. And so the idea is that you enter a kind of triangular space now, as it's sometimes called. So there's not just the dyadic, two poles, but there's a triangular third position. It's very painful, again, to realize that there's not just one person you have to trust, but you have to sort of somehow throw yourself onto others, onto life itself even. Deeply unsettling experience. But of course, if you feel secure enough inside, all those kind of good qualities, then life expands again into this third position. I think it's both an external thing in terms of friendship would be perhaps the characteristic love of this phase, where you don't want to possess your friend, you want to be with your friend, and this is sometimes put, not gaze into their eyes, but look straight ahead to step into life. So you can still see the triangular three-dimensional kind of notion here. And then religiously, I think that this capacity is reflected in the capacity to, say, critique your otherwise strongly held religious beliefs, to use metaphor, to be happy with aesthetics. You know, you walk into a great building, and it's expansive. It has literally a three-dimensional quality. You don't have to be able to pin it down. You can let yourself into it. So there's a slightly different sort of spiritual capacity in that again, in this third position. So you've got 1, 2, and then the triangular 3. It also enables you, I should maybe just mention this, also enables you to not just have an experience, but to reflect upon an experience. So this is why mindfulness is such a powerful tool, because mindfulness cultivates this capacity to not just have an experience, but reflect upon it. And it has therapeutic value, because it means that over time, you're not just overwhelmed by panic, by anxiety, by depression, but you're able to step back from it slightly. And this too then has a kind of spiritual element when it's used in a spiritual context, to not just be in some kind of sense of religious feeling, but to be able to reflect upon it too. And that means that you can take a step back, and actually that makes for a bit of space around the experience that maybe lets more in. It's a way of cultivating spiritual growth, you might say. So that's 1, 2, and then the 3. And the idea is not that you kind of, once you're done with 1, you go to 2, and then once you're done with 2, you go to 3. But ideally, as an adult, you have good access to all of them. Because you need some narcissism when you're older. You need a bit of narcissism to sit on a stage and to talk to people. But hopefully it's one where I don't feel so overwhelmed. I sort of feel more or less comfortable, so I can kind of get over myself a bit and communicate well enough. Similarly, you fall in love, you need to be able to do that. And similarly with the third position too, so that love can, as Eric Fromm put it, can move from falling in love to standing in love. So then you come to the fourth position, and I think this is where the spiritual dimension is the most fully developed. You might call it the transpersonal, you might call it the mystical, but I think that can be quite complicated, because it's not necessarily obscure, it's just a bit beyond language. It's something that's from the heart, perhaps, more than from the head. And I think you get a sense of this when you meet people who have this capacity of relating, because there's something translucent about them. You feel they're fully there, but somehow there's more than them just there. I was lucky enough to sit in a room, quite a small room, with the Dalai Lama a couple of years back. And I hardly could say anything. I couldn't think of anything to say. But the thing I remember is his presence. And I think he didn't say anything very tremendous, actually. He said, we're all brothers and sisters, or something like that. But it was his presence that was so profound. And I think that he must be able to occupy, as it were, this fourth position. There's a collective quality, an egoless quality, you might say, something translucent that comes through him. And I think that if you read people like Augustine in the Christian tradition, as well as others in different traditions, what they discover is that God, as Augustine puts it, was closer to him than he was to himself. There's a kind of another movement beyond just me and my friends, as it were, me engaging with things, but a sort of dropping into what you might call not just love relationships, but love as the ground of being itself. A sense that compassion was there all along in the Buddhist tradition, you might say. And I think this reflects the positions and the movement between the positions, because in a way what the positions are is a discovery that, you thought it was just me, but actually there's another who's looking after me. You thought it was just me and my beloved, but actually there's a greater world into which we can all step. Our love overflows, perhaps into children, into a deeper experience of life. There's always more out there already to discover. And in a way, the fourth position, the most overtly spiritual position, just sort of completes that. It says, actually, what I've discovered is that love is the ground of being, that compassion is there all along. And so, in theistic traditions, certainly you'll read God is love. I think that's partly what that's trying to latch onto. And then I think other traditions have something similar to say too. It's why, love is, in a way, the path to the key, as the author of The Cloud of Unknowing puts it, reason can never understand God, but love can penetrate through the cloud of unknowing.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks very much, Mark. Deborah.
I should just say I'm very embarrassed about having been encountered online in that way. I think because it might well be an act of public canoodling that I've somehow inadvertently got myself into. And having said that, I'm about to publicly canoodle again, I think, but in relationship to a different lover. what kind of love Sorry, my husband's sitting in the front row. It's a different lover. What kind of love do we need was the question that was put to me. So I guess I'm responding to that. The spirituality in this, I don't know how on the surface it is. I think it's perhaps something that will come out more in the Q&A. The love that excites us, our imaginations most, is the kind that in English we fall into. It's a great expression because it encodes the apparently accidental nature of love, the lack of any control, the vertigo, the destabilizing, discomforting, disturbing aspects of the process. For even as the word love conjures up a mirage of blissful unity, of satiated desires, of Eden, what also unmistakably resonates in that deceptively simple phrase, to fall in love, is the sinful, the criminal, the anarchic, and thus the loss of innocence, the agony of separation, and the exile from Eden. I say this advisedly as someone who has only very recently fallen irreversibly in love into a new love. So this is really a dispatch from the front line. You see, I've just become a mother, so parents in the room and other mothers especially may well know what emotional upheaval I'm going through. If asked to name my feeling for my baby, sublime, fierce, ecstatic, joyous, painful, anxious, ambivalent, neurotic, and erotic, then love is probably the word. But goodness me, love, or my love, is anything but cozy. How then should I understand the ferocity of my feeling? It's oxytocin, the love hormone, a doctor told me. It's there to help you do whatever it takes, however many times a night, to protect your infant, to meet all his myriad demands. But while my love certainly protects my child, it is, I suspect, equally important that as he grows and develops, I strive to protect him from the force and intensity of my love. Because while now I'm still, I think, perfectly within my rights to be interested, as I am profoundly interested in the contents of every one of his nappies, there's always the risk that I'm going to become Philip Roth's Sophie Portnoy, manically banging on the door of her adolescent son in the bathroom and demanding to know what's going on in there. The family home, that most dangerous place, is a line from one of Adrienne Rich's poems, because how can we protect ourselves from those who really do passionately love us, and so who claim in all sincerity to have our best interests at heart? In a book I've yet to read called Doing Psychoanalysis in Tehran, a friend who's here told me that there's a passage about a mother's anonymous group, or a would-be mother's anonymous group, where mothers can go along and testify to their addictive, obsessive, crazy, stupid love for their children, and having done so, having shared, they can return to the job of parenting as if it were just a perfectly equitable management position, which is such a good idea, I think. But if a loving mother is someone who doesn't profess her love to her child too much, lest it weigh down too heavily, there are other problems associated with this dissimulation of her love, of her desire. Psychoanalyst Jean Laplanche said that because the breast can present itself to the child as an impersonal object there to serve a purely technical function, the mother's desire may communicate itself to the child unconsciously in such a way as to render the infant's own desire for the object fraught with unreadable, indecipherable meanings and demands that will leave their imprint on all the child's future relationships. I just mention that in order to make the point, really, that loving someone or even caring for someone doesn't mean you're not going to screw them or yourself up in unforeseeable ways. And I think that is an important point. In Lisa Opinionese's magnificent book, All About Love, she gives it the subtitle, The Anatomy of an Unruly Emotion. Unruly as in unrulable, anathema to every rule book. Love, that is to say, does not always make good government. When the philosopher Hannah Arendt was once accused by the scholar Gershom Scholem of failing to have love for her people, she replied that she can love only individuals, not nations, not abstractions. Love, she thought, was best left out of politics. As she put it, love, by reason of its passion, destroys the in-between which relates us to and separates us from others. Love can only become false and perverted when it's used for political purposes, such as the change and salvation of the world. Now, one can, of course, argue with her. There are so many different relations we call love, after all. But I am interested in the love that tends to be impolitic, in the love that is primarily a form of passion. And passion, according to another thinker, Emmanuel Levinas, is what hurtles us towards the other, the stranger, the unknown, whatever or whomever puts limits on the safe, the certain, the knowable. We're not passionate about things or people whom we think we have the measure of, whom we can see clearly. And nor is love simply something that we can be relied on to give charitably without demanding or expecting something, probably the equivalent thing in return. Love makes us needy. It always risks turning us back into what we always, to some extent, are, babies. And it reawakens, I think, our infantile sense of helplessness, defenselessness, neediness. Love, says Levinas, turns into need, but a need that still presupposes the total transcendent exteriority of the beloved. Our passion for the other, in other words, entails the erotic impulse to merge with the other, to break down all boundaries, whatever seems to separate us, our bodies, our souls. But it only persists as passion or as love insofar as the other with whom and in whom we would lose or find ourselves continues to appear to us as unpossessable and unknowable, an absolute separation that can make us a little crazy. I think of a knitted artwork I once saw in a Louise Bourgeois exhibition that left a real impression on me. It was of a mother giving birth to a baby, and it included arrows pointing in the opposing directions of the two heads at that moment of giving birth, because separation, of course, begins at birth. So, contrary to what popular culture would sometimes have us believe, I think that love has the tendency, or it works, to deepen as much as to overcome our differences. In fact, I'd be tempted to question whether or not we would even be capable of perceiving our differences without love, since, as we perhaps know, the opposite of love isn't hate, which is a part of love, or it's certainly a part of my love life. The opposite of love is indifference. Indifference. So I'll give a little example, and I think this example may well be one of the earliest sources we have of someone falling in love at first sight, and it comes from the Bible. When Jacob first sees Rachel at the well, before any words are uttered, he kisses her, and then he cries. And then he cries. Why the tears? Is his love unrequited? Certainly there are, as the story unfolds, hints that his desire for her may not be equaled by her. She has her heart set on something else, children. Leah, on the other hand, Rachel's older sister, who Jacob marries first and who has a very fruitful womb, names most of her children after the pangs of suffering she has felt because of her unrequited love for him, for a man who loves her younger sister, not her. Everyone in the story cries at some point. Leah for Jacob, Jacob for Rachel, Rachel for her children. Because you can't fall in love, it seems, without a certain capacity for tears. For love, once acknowledged, forces us or confronts us with the inevitability, forces us to confront the inevitability of loss, of not being able to make sure of one's love. Indeed, a passionate life, a life of desire, is a life sustained paradoxically by what it lacks. We miss the other, the beloved, the lover, even when they're present. And even, or especially when, as it says in the Song of Songs, we kiss them with the kisses of our mouth. Pablo Neruda begins one of his most beautiful love sonnets, "Don't go far off, not even for a day." And then a little later, "Don't leave me, even for an hour," before finally, "Don't leave me for a second, my dearest." There beats the heart of a lover. Don't leave me for a second. What a desperate thing love is, how naked it makes us. All of this, I think, goes somewhat against the love, love, love that, according to the song, is easy. Love is easy in the sense that we fall into it, but I don't know if the consequences of love could be considered so easy. Is love all you need? Or is love all you want, all you crave, the only thing that motivates you? That's not the take-home message of the Beatles song, but it seems to me that the love we want, as opposed to need, is forever bound up with the dynamics of desire and ultimately the desire for desire itself. Indeed, if the question tonight is what kind of love do we need, then possibly a translation of that question is what kind of love can't we do without? And one answer to that may be that as we mature from babies into adults, as Mark has described, so the love we need must needs be transformed into the love we want. The love, in other words, that we can live without, which isn't at all to renounce one's demand for love or one's love of love, but it is to recognize that living without is at the heart of it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Deborah, and thank you also, Mark. I'm going to open up in a moment or two for the audience. Yeah, just check the mic is... We don't want to...
Is it not on?
Oh, no, it's on, and that was all heard, but I think just make sure we don't lose any words.
Okay, sorry.
We're okay, Mary, right? Yeah, I think we're fine, right? Yeah. Okay, so in a moment, let's open up for the others, but I guess I want to ask a question to both of you simultaneously, although hopefully won't answer simultaneously. And it's about sort of the maturation of love, because, Deborah, you spoke of love in terms of desire, in terms of the sort of the madness and ferocity of it. And Mark was trying to paint, I think, a somewhat more measured picture of progression of love and the notion that one might actually love in a mature way, that there might be a form of love that was bona fide love, that wasn't sort of a dilution or any kind of lesser experience or virtue, but there was still somehow balance, maybe integrated somehow. Do you recognize, first of all, Deborah, that kind of love progression to something more mature, or do you feel that that ceases to be the kind of love that is really of value and that really excites you?
I think I just concluded those marks by imagining the maturity of love as a movement from the love we need to the love we want. And I felt there was, I didn't feel so dissimilar to Mark in that way. Although, I mean, I would hesitate to consider myself a love progressive, or I've made progress in love. I think one moves back and forward all the time, yeah.
I'm definitely not one of these presenters who loves to manufacture a debate. What's going on? But what I'm curious about, though, is there is something about love that when you're even, maternal love or romantic love, there is a sense in which you're taking part in something that's beyond you, that somehow transcends the individual relationship, in which you literally, as you mentioned, you fall into it, where it is something that's not fully defined by the two parts thereof. And yet, when you're in that kind of ecstatic madness of love, is there a sense in which that's the real thing, somehow purer, uncontaminated version of love, or is there a sense in which that really is the immature version of it? Do you feel there's a value judgment you can make, or are they just different shades of something? And no one mentioned grey at this point.
I certainly wouldn't want to make any value judgments. It was quite personal, my personal understanding of my love life, sure. And love, the role played by love in my life. I would say that desire for me, in that Levinasian sense, always has that sort of possibility of transcendence, because desire acknowledges a kind of lack in myself that pushes me to go beyond my own borders, whereas the notion of need is a notion of something that could be fulfilled, that could have an end and can bring me back to a sort of contained entity. Whilst I'm in a state of wanting, of yearning, then transcendence is always on the menu, if you like.
Okay, sure. Mark, what do you make of that? What do you make?
Yeah, I mean, the ecstatic, I think spiritual writers feel ambivalent about the role of the ecstatic in love. There's something about the ecstatic which does propel us in our sort of journey through love, but they always, it seems to me, I make a assumption, I feel like I always read them saying, but be wary, don't get too fixed on the ecstatic, because in a way it'll hold you back at that particular stage. You might, I'm being slightly progressive here. But I think it is this, we have good access to all positions. That's rather preferred to call them positions rather than stages. Yeah, so, and in relation to what you're saying about pain and suffering, when you're talking about tears, it reminds me of what Ignatius of Loyola, he called tears a gift. And because they're about a softening and an opening. Tears can mean many things, of course, but in this sense, tears are about a letting go, an opening, an expansive kind of emotion and experience to undergo. Now, again, certainly in theistic traditions, suffering is, in that sense, suffering is the way to God. Because it's about a letting go of oneself, and that is a painful experience. And so, the cross, for example, can be seen as a symbol of love in Christianity. But if all you have is love, as opposed to all you need is love, I wonder whether suffering then, there's no end to suffering, you might say. So, in modern discourse on love, often it's just one, portrayed as one bit of suffering after another with no other reference apart from the suffering. And that's, maybe if Simon May was here, he would make the point that that's because we've moved from God being love to love being God. There's no external reference to love.
Okay. So I'm very interested to probe that a little bit. I mean, I love this connection between love and tears, that somehow they're almost coextensive, that somehow the things that move us to tears are things we're deeply invested in and yearn for and long for. And one of our previous events in this series by Guy Claxton was about that kind of welling up in the body and what it signals, we call them glimpses, of something beyond us, something greater than the self. And I guess we're getting to a point where I'm curious to know if you would understand love as something that's purely sort of an emergent property from human relations and culture, or do you have a view of it as something somehow transcendent that sort of exists without our presence? That's something that we create and build through in the human world, or is it somehow something coming in from left stage that we take part in?
I don't know anything about love. That's the truth. I don't know anything about it. I can only. I feel it comes from the unconscious. Right. I feel that. In some ways that's a cliche. Most of the romantic novels we'll have read is about a heroine or a hero who's having a relationship with somebody, and only in the last moment do they find out they're in love with them. They had no idea. And I think that's sort of roughly how it is. I think we don't know very much about ourselves and love, or where love comes from. But I suppose if we're framing it in terms of spirituality, I think it shares with faith, a sort of relationship to the unknown that is a limit. It's a limiting factor on knowledge. So it, in that sense, makes us less contained, less conceited, I think. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, we're going to open up to the audience now. If I can ask you to wait for the mic, and when you first ask your question, if you could introduce yourself briefly. And err on the side of asking earlier rather than later, because we tend to have a very slow start followed by a mad flurry, and I'm keen to avoid that. So yeah, hands please. Kirsta, if you want to begin in the middle, and we'll take the flanks in a second. Yes, thanks.
Yes, I've heard a lot this evening about falling, a lot about being. I haven't heard anything about doing. Erich Fromm referred to love as the positive affirmation of an object. It's a course of conduct in his definition. Any comments on that?
Okay, thank you. First of all, Mark, and then I'll take Deborah in a second.
I think, I'm sure that's right, that that's been a gap so far. And I think this is one of the ways you can distinguish between regressed love and more mature kinds of love, because the mature love leads to action, broadly ethical in character, I guess, whereas merely the kind of what Freud latched onto as the oceanic experience, which he thought was just regressive, kind of, sort of peak experience where all is one. There's no ethical import in that. It's just there for the peak experience, I think that that's one of the reasons why what you might call authentic religious love is always marked by not just the roots but the fruits, and the fruits are that you love your neighbour as well as God and self. So the doing and the action is certainly part of it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we'll take one here at the front, please, Kirsty.
Thank you for that. Yes, I have a question. My interest is in the sort of transformation of things. So particularly, more helicopter view of love, the transformation from dust to love. So the journey from nothing, dust, life, human, love, whether or not there's a direction. And then tied into that would be the statement that you can love because you are first loved. How does that find itself within the mission?
Love as goal, love as endpoint.
Yes.
Okay.
I think Teilhard de Chardin had a theory on that. I just.
Deborah, you can either answer that or the prior question. It's your call.
Oh, I can't answer both?
You can. Yeah, even better.
Just on the subject of doing, I mean, I touched on it in the sense that I'm getting up every hour during the night at the moment for a very little man that I love. For most people, I wouldn't get up every single hour in the night. I've been doing it for months now, every single hour up in the night. And I asked a friend of mine, a rabbi, what is love? Does he think in his tradition? He says, love is, for him, hineni, here I am. Here I am. In other words, you know that you love somebody if no matter when they call you, what they ask you to do, your instinct is yes. Yes, a kind of affirmative. I will do what it is. Now tell me what you want. So I think there is a necessary doing that belongs to love. On the question of what turns dust into love, I would put that question in reverse. I didn't give a talk. I wrote a talk that I never gave last year about the way in which dust is continually imbued with eros in poetry and indeed in religion. That dust, the flecks of dust, what seems to be the least important matter in the world, the absence of meaning, continually appears both in religious texts and in poetic and in literary texts as love itself. In other words, there's nothing but love, I would say.
Great, thank you. Question at the back, please.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Not yet. Try
Hello?
it.
Yeah, hi, thanks.
Yeah.
I was wondering as you were talking, I was thinking about consciousness, because consciousness, I suppose, similar to love, is an area where everybody thinks they know what it is. But I remember reading Daniel Dennett, who kind of talks about this concept of folk psychology, where everybody imagines that they know something, but actually most of the time they're completely wrong. And, when deep philosophy is done or reference is made to scientific developments, our understanding of the thing changes substantially. So I was wondering in that respect whether, to your knowledge, much work had been done. I know there was some reference made to oxytocin, in the same way as work is being done now through neurological research to understand more about consciousness, to understand more about love, such that we can, using, I suppose, neurological, physiological, chemical, etc., understanding to learn more about it.
Okay, so kind of reductionism of love. How valid? How persuasive?
I've yet to read anything from a neurological or about hormones that doesn't say anything more than what's screamingly obvious about love, to be frank. I mean, it's not to say it's not worth doing, because who knows where it'll end up. But read Shakespeare. You know, it's like, you know, a higher degree compared to a, you know, barely an O-level, to be... I just feel about that, about the neurological stuff.
So let me just imagine, that, Daniel Dennett was mentioned. I can't possibly say what he would say, but someone who was sympathetic to this, who may have children of their own, who may have wonderful relationships of their own, may have suffered the agony of love and know it from a first-person perspective, they may then, in their day job, go into the lab and be charged with writing a book about the neurochemistry of love. And they might do a rather fine job of it insofar as they can give a description at the sort of biological, scientific level. The question would then be, do you feel that's always going to just restate the obvious? Or do you feel there's anything there that can actually help us understand better the nature of the experiences we're going through?
It's an open question. It's a very young science. I suspect you can't reduce love to the material, though. It's essentially an immaterial experience. It's not to say the material won't tell you something, but it's always going to be, you know, a monocular view.
Okay. Deborah, do you have anything to add? Or?
No.
Okay, fine. So, yeah. Wait for the mic. 1 second.
Sorry, yeah, thanks. But in the way that you describe it, effectively you are creating lots of different narratives. So, for instance, the example of the rabbi, about what love might be, and then enacting them. So it's not, you're supposing with Shakespeare that actually there's a kind of essentialism to it, but then in the way you're describing it, actually it's very contextual. And so that's really what I'm trying to target, which is, you know, we can create many, many narratives, and those can then lead us to behave in certain ways. Actually, is there something essential? I'm very curious about the fact of what if, perchance, everybody's loving wrong? You know, because in our physiology there's a different way we could be loving which is more effective.
Okay. Let's hold that thought for now, and we'll take the question from the side. What if we're loving wrong? We'll just keep that in the air, because that was kind of part of the event's context. Yes, please.
This is a question for Mark as a psychotherapist. Do people who felt that they were unloved and didn't experience love in their journey, in their search for love, tell us something about love?
Do people in their search for... Do people in their journey towards love learn something about the nature of love along the way? Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's this phrase which you...
They weren't loved, excuse me. Sorry, I didn't catch the beginning of the question. So it's something about those who weren't loved initially, who then later sought love, and learned something about the nature of love, even though they weren't initially loved. Okay, intricate question, but I think we've got it now.
I think in a way we all learn about love through the failure of love. There's this expression, again, Donald Winnicott coined it, the notion of the good enough parent. The perfect parent would actually be smothering, and you wouldn't learn anything about love at all, because in the narcissistic phase, for example, they would supply your every need without you even realizing it was being given. They've got to fail you a bit, parents, in order to help you grow into love. Now, but on the other hand, it can't be catastrophic failure, because that leads to the equal and opposite result, which is equally damaging. So he had this phrase of the good enough, that it's got to be enough to keep you going, as it were, but not so much that it stops you.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Yes, question here at the middle. We're at that point where we're going to take a few questions together, and I'll try and keep the narrative thread. So we'll have one here, and then we'll have two in this middle row on this side, please. Please.
Hello. I'd like to make a small observation about the last question. There are people who were significantly deprived of love as children, but often they transferred that love onto animals. A friend of mine once described himself as having been brought up by Labradors. So I suppose love will find a way in that respect. But what I actually wanted to ask, the cyberculture writer Doug Rushkoff, he once said that consumer culture is basically all about trying to attract the opposite sex. And I suppose if you apply it to what's going on now, we're destroying the planet to look better, to have better lives, to be more successful, all in the quest to have the perfect partner, the one who will fulfill all our desires and never let us down. But a lot of younger people now, they're starting to embrace shared ownership of objects, but also to explore different patterns of relationships, such as polyamory. How would that fit into your evolutionary model?
Okay, love and consumerism, evolutionary model. I think I've got the question. We'll take these other two questions now, and we'll come back to it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
At the risk of introducing an elephant into the great room, I just want to ask. I think it's for Devorah particularly. I want to ask a little bit about unrequited or unreturned love. I was reading practically simultaneously 3 novels a couple of weeks ago. One by Dorothy L. Sayers, one by Vikram Seth, one by Sally Vickers.
A little closer to the mic.
Sorry, and they were all talking about, the equality of love and the equality of the relationship between these two, the two characters in question. What does unrequited or unreturned love have to teach us about the nature of love itself, and for that matter, where is it validated in literature?
Okay, thank you. We'll give Deborah that in a second, but one more question before we do.
Hi, I'm coming at it both as an artist, a physicist, and a mum. And what's interesting is a lot of the love that you've discussed this evening is the needy sort of conditional love. And I kind of look at it, the scientist in me goes, right, if I can step outside this and actually see the type of love that I'm giving, am I capable of giving unconditional love? Are we capable of it? So that's my question.
Are we capable of giving unconditional love?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
great. So 3 big meaty questions. I think we'll go, the political question is a big one, so we'll come back to that. First of all, Deborah, if you could speak to the issue of unrequited love in literature.
Well, actually, the example I gave very deliberately from a biblical example was a story of unrequited love. I think it's the reason I gave that as an example is because I suppose the larger point perhaps I'm trying to make is the notion of love not as something we have, but as something we are. And something that's constitutive of us, not as I don't mean that in a cliched ways, but that we are this lack, this yearning for the other. And in that story, which really is a blueprint of the kind of foundation of a kind of sect, a religion, a set of tribal, a family romance that's really at the basis of the kind of Judeo-Christian civilization that we're still more or less, most of us referring to in one way or another all the time. It's a story. It's a very complicated story of unreciprocated love, and it leads people to do extraordinary things, to labor in various ways, to create. It leads people to do wonderful things. So I think that unrequited love, if we take on board the kind of description of love I've been trying to get at, can perhaps be full of suffering, of course, I wouldn't want to deny that, but it can be also very passionate, a very full life as well on the basis of that. Was that...
Unconditional love, you want to say something?
Unconditional love, I would never trust myself. I suppose, is all I can say to that, to assume I was ever being unconditional. I think one of the reasons I enjoy saying I love you to my baby is because I know he can't yet understand what those words mean, but I do feel that were I to say it to him, when I say it to him, and he does understand it, some kind of positioning will be taking place, some kind of subject to my love will be occurring. Of course I will say it to him. I don't know when I'll be able to stop, but I could never assume that I'm not asking or demanding something when I'm loving.
Okay, great. Mark, if I can, try and resist saying anything about unrequited or unconditional love, because this question was a very important one in terms of the political and cultural salience of love and how it's presented. And that actually, one of the reasons we're doing this event actually is because I feel we've witnessed to some extent a collapsing of the broader conception of love, divine, maternal, fraternal, and so forth, into a fairly simplistic notion of romantic love that doesn't even make sense half the time and is not true to our experience. And it's sometimes used to promote identity projects, in effect, that we become more lovable through certain things we do and act and so forth, and by. Your impression of that, is that the case? If so, what do we do about it?
If this is a reflection on the same sort of issue, I think that our culture is in the grip of what you might call a romantic myth, which is that there's someone out there for you and life won't be complete unless you find that person and form some kind of bond with them. Now, even if you don't believe it, there's still incredible pressure to sort of act it out. And that's why myths are so powerful, because you don't have to believe myths for them to be true. Barbara Cartland, as you mentioned, sells shed loads of novels on the back of it. Flowers are flown from continent to continent on the 14th of February on the back of it. It has real tangible commercial reality. I think that part of what's happened, and this is just a little link to the unconditional love point, and again, to channel Simon May. Simon, if you're listening, I hope this is about right. But one of Simon's points is that the Romantic movement, which is, in its bigger sense, about a desire for oneness, gets going in the 18th century, at about the same time that God becomes a deistic phenomenon in the West. So the relationship ceases and God becomes the kind of grand engineer. And that what happens is that human beings forget that only God can offer unconditional love. In the mythology, even if not, you don't quite believe the actuality, but one of the attributes you might give to a god is unconditional love. And so it gets transplanted onto human beings. And because human beings can't give unconditional love, as Deborah so beautifully put it, it's a disaster. And we can't move on,
We have time for one last question. We can't take a second one. You've been holding hands all evening, so I'm going to take one for you, just because it's sort of apropos.
I just wanted your opinion on where you think the world is now in terms of love compared to the past. So this romantic myth, is it just something that's purported by the media and we're actually not in a great love state compared to 100, 200 years ago, whatever? Just want to see where you think we are on the spectrum compared to the past.
Thank you. So if Simon were here, he'd have a perfect answer for this, because his work is about the kind of genealogy of love, I believe, and the idea of love. Both of you, if you can, how do you sort of read the sort of surfing of the zeitgeist of love over the last sort of 100 years or so, to end with whatever you want to for this evening?
I am no historian of love, but to sort of connect your question to the question about different kinds of constellations of love today, I would certainly say that love suffers most when it's unrecognized, when it's unpermitted, when the way in which you love doesn't have a sort of social sanction. So the gay marriage bill, that seems to me hugely important and progressive when it comes to expanding love for us all, expanding, and any other sort of loving relationship that really is grounded in I think, what is recognizably loving in some very loose sense would seem to me to be something. So in that sense, I suppose, whilst the romantic fallacies that are often attached to liberalism are something to watch out for, I think there is, a lot to be said for freeing love.
Okay, thank you. Mark.
Yeah, maybe to mention that, and then also just to pick up on the comment about consumerism as well. It seems to me that one of the things which a parent provides for the child is a holding, a containing for their hate. And for their anger and for their envy, which are all part of love, again, as Devorah was saying. But you need to have a containing space in order for that full panoply of emotions to be expressed and then taken back in again without doing untold, irreparable damage. And it seems to me we live in a culture which is experimenting with these kind of feelings, and the worry would be, where's the containing? Perhaps in terms of parental containing, but maybe more specifically in terms of the kind of wisdom traditions about love, the traditions around love that can hold it, the rites of passage, those kinds of things that allow the full expression, but also enable you to take it back in again without it destroying people around you or yourself. And so that would be the worry, I would say, about love today, one way of putting the worry about love today.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have people watching online. We have a group in Guernsey, I believe, who tune in regularly. We hope Simon's tuning in. Sorry you couldn't be here. We hope we haven't butchered your ideas too much. We want to thank people on Twitter who've been following, and also thank RSA Fellows for making this possible. This event is recorded, so if you've enjoyed it, even if you haven't, do tell your friends about it. It will be up online very swiftly, actually, under RSA Replay, warts and all, and then an edited version will come a bit later. Just remains me to thank very much Devorah Vaughan and Mark Vernon. Thanks very much. This is Baum.